All right, welcome. So this video is all about the point of reading books. So the question you guys might have clicking on the title of this video is, what is the point in reading books? And the reason you clicked on this video is probably because you've been thinking about that a lot. You probably have a desire to start reading more books, but don't have a strong enough why in order to make a consistent habit out of it. So this video is going to cover why you should actually start reading books, why they're essential for anybody on self-improvement, for anybody trying to develop a business and build a business, for anybody who wants to become a professional athlete, or even just wants to grow or excel in some area of life. Reading books is essential because all of the information of all of the people who've been successful at what we want to do in a previous time has been written down in books. Right? And so the way that we learn new things and the way that we become masters at something is by taking in the information of somebody who's already a master and then applying it to our own practice to the point that we refine our own practice to the point of perfection or mastery. So reading books is an essential practice for anybody on this journey. So the first section here is why more people don't read, right? Why don't more people read? And the simple answer I'm going to give is because everybody is overstimulated. Everybody's dopamine receptors are fried out. So the idea of sitting for a long extended period of time reading a book, which is low stimulation, it's an extended period of focus, and it does not, like I said, it does not invoke these intense dopamine releases. So it's less attractive to the overstimulated mind. And that's pretty much the point here, is most people should be reading, but the reason why more people don't read is because they simply can't receive enough stimulation from something like a book in order to be able to focus on it. Now, what that means is what people need to do is realize why they are using things like social media, why they are on TikTok, why they are on YouTube. The reason you're doing this, the reason you're scrolling on these apps, the reason you're going to anything like drugs, alcohol, any of these meaningless forms of pleasure, the reason is because you require more action in your life, right? You require more progress in your life. You require more achievement within your regular life. So if your day-to-day life isn't fulfilling enough, if your day-to-day life isn't you living up to your highest standard, well, then you're going to be less satisfied, and therefore you're going to want to fill that gap with overstimulation or things like pleasure, alcohol, TikTok, any form of social media, really, junk food, porn, etc. Now, the solution to this is for people to shift their focus from stimulation to long-term growth. If you have a growth mindset, if you have a delayed gratification mindset, then what you're doing is you're simply shifting your attention from instant gratification activities. When you're bored, instead of going on TikTok for the stimulation, go towards a book, not for an alternative source of stimulation, but as an alternative to use that time. But the goal within reading is actually this long-term growth of learning something over, the course of the next week, the next month, whatever. So a lot of people don't realize that they are scrolling on TikTok because their brain craves information, right? Their brain craves regular information. The same way our stomachs crave food, our brain craves knowledge and information. It wants to consume information. And this is a natural process. This is something that we do naturally in order to learn from our environment. We absorb information from the world around us. For the non-overstimulated mind, when you are bored, you are typically analyzing something, gaining some level of information, right? You're usually analyzing the world around you. You're thinking through a problem. You're doing all these things that require effort in your brain. Or a better way to put it, you're doing all of these things that allow your brain to take in and process information into new understanding of the world around you, right? So this is the natural default state for our brain when we become bored. However, we've rewired our brain to associate this process with things like TikTok, things like YouTube, things like social media. So when we have this craving for information, we go to something like social media instead of going to a book or some work that is meaningful to us, or even exercise routine, right? So what actually makes reading so important, right? If people don't know how important reading is, right? If most people aren't reading, right, because they're more obsessed with TikTok or social media, why is it so important in the first place, right? What makes it so important? And I did explain that in part in the last section, but the main reason why reading is so important is because it is essentially just a default habit that we can slip to anytime we're bored. That is an alternative to scrolling. So instead of scrolling, we have books. We can read books. So we don't actually need to go to social media. We don't need to go to TikTok. We don't need to fry out our dopamine receptors and burn off our attention span every time we're bored. We can use books as an alternative habit. And what happens is not only do we have something to do for entertainment when we're bored, we also, through the thing we do in our entertainment when we're bored, progress ourselves further within all the things we're pursuing in our daily life, right? If you're building a business and your break time is filled with TikTok, you're more likely than not frying out your dopamine receptors, burning your attention span, and rewiring your brain in ways that aren't coherent with that goal. However, if you're starting a business and your free time is filled by reading business books, you're only helping yourself in the business end of things when you go back to working because A, you're not frying out your dopamine receptors, so you will still be able to engage in work and stay focused. But also, by reading books that give you more knowledge on business, therefore you become better at business. So that's one reason why reading is so important. The next thing is just that humans naturally need to be reading, right? Our brains are designed to read and take in information, and our brains are designed to do it slowly over a long period of time, right? Our brains are designed to take in a small amount of information steadily over a long period of time, and that's how it absorbs, processes, and understands information. Right, so that's why reading is so important, is because it's actually the best and most reliable source of information for our brain. It's the most reliable source of knowledge because it's the most, you think about how with food, when you're getting nutrients, you want to look at what's most bioavailable. Reading in a similar sense is bioavailable to our brain in the sense that the information in books is actually able to be fully processed and then replicated in action, right? So it's able to be transformed into action, meaning we can gain wisdom. With things like TikTok, when we're taking in more information than we can consume and absorb, well, what happens is we end up discarding most of it anyways. We don't actually maintain a lot of that knowledge. Whereas books, because it's a longer period of time, your brain actually takes that information in a little bit deeper. And because you can translate it to action, then it becomes ingrained, even more from there. But the next section is why you should start reading today, right? Why you should pick up a book today. The reason I say today is because it's easy. Anybody could start reading today. Anybody should start reading today. And if you haven't been reading in the past, today's your day to start, right? And the reason I say you should start today is because the sooner you build up this habit, right? The sooner you make reading an easy thing, right? The sooner you build the skill of reading, the more you will be able to progress in your communication skills, the more you'll be able to progress in your vocabulary skills, the more you'll be able to progress in whatever area you're reading about. You'll learn much more information and therefore progress much faster. You will align yourself with a habit that is going to keep you in a flow state, keep you in a state optimized for growth and productivity because you're thinking in a way that is about growth and productivity. And that's obviously if you're reading nonfiction books. If you're reading fiction books and storybooks, it's a different case. But when I talk about reading books, I usually typically mean nonfiction, self-improvement books. But whatever book suits you, reading in general is really, really good for our brain. So the reason why I say it's so important to start right away is just because the sooner you start the habit, the sooner you build the skill of reading, the sooner you can actually really, really get into books, right? Really get into learning from books. And this is a very valuable thing to have. I'm now 19 looking back, and I learned about reading first and started reading first when I was 15. But I didn't really stay consistent, and I'm looking back and I really regret that because now I'm in a position where I have probably 10 times as much things that I want to actually learn from as far as reading goes, right? 10 times more reading that I actually have to do. It's part of my job, right? Half of my job is reading. So therefore, I'm looking back and I'm thinking, if I had just focused on building the skill of reading books, not focused on optimizing for learning the most as possible from each book and all of these different random things or overcomplicating the process, if I had just practiced the skill of reading over time, I would have gotten myself to a point where now I can absorb information very, very easily, very quickly, right? But, what's the fix to this? What's the solution? Is to start reading today and make it a daily habit, make it a consistent practice, and keep up on it over a long period of time. Read as much as possible. And read instead of doing any of these other overstimulating activities. Because what's going to happen is over time, your brain and your dopamine receptors, if you stop doing the bad activities, are going to resensitize to regular dopamine activities. And then you'll get to a point where, for me personally, I get the same amount of dopamine from a book, right? A book is actually, to me, more stimulating because it's more interesting, right? And that's not to say like I couldn't go and get addicted to TikTok again, but it is to say that my brain is wired to understand that the book is the better option, the more interesting option. And because I'm a person who identifies with wanting to learn, I actually get pleasure and stimulation from learning. So part of it is identity as well. You want to align your identity. But the main thing is by practicing consistently and by using reading as an alternative habit, you will eventually resensitize your dopamine receptors to reading books, for example, as a stimulating activity. So what books should you read? So I just told you to start reading today, meaning most of you guys probably don't have a book on hand that you could start reading right away. If you do, pick up that book. If you've already read that book or, it's just not something that's interesting, let's say it's a book you had from middle school and it's not a self-improvement book, what are good books for you to start reading if you are to start today? I have 3 books that I'm going to recommend for you guys, all of these for different reasons, but these are all books that are favorites of mine. These are all books that I actually was able to read and finish during a period of time when I couldn't read for shit. So when I was just learning and getting into reading, or learning how to and getting into reading, and I say learning how to read, I say learning how to read as if I never went to school or learned how to read, and the reason I say that is because truly reading in a way that you can absorb the information and learn is very, very, very different from how we learn to read in school. So that's another thing. You will have to train yourself and teach yourself how to read properly. And that is something I can make videos on in the future. If that's something you guys are interested in, you can let me know. But when I was first starting out and I couldn't really read for shit, I was kind of a little bit probably like mentally handicapped in a way. Not in the sense that I was actually mentally handicapped, but in the sense that my brain had been so fried that I literally couldn't read for shit. And it took me time to work my way out of that. So that's where we are today. But during this period of time where I had a really hard time reading books and finishing books, these were 3 books that I was actually able to read in full. And these are also books that I recommend for anybody getting into reading. So the first book I have here is Atomic Habits. That was the first book I ever read, cover to cover. And it was a really, really inspiring book. It was a really eye-opening book. I found it at pretty much a perfect time as well. I found it at a period of my life where I was starting to get into self-improvement. And by learning about the foundation of self-improvement as habits, right? Realizing that the foundation of self-improvement is habits, not the specific habits, not the goal, not this, not that, but actually the habits themselves are the foundation. And that generates the results that we see compounded over time. The reason why we see these people becoming massively successful from simple habits is because of this compound effect over time. That whole concept, that whole idea inspired pretty much my entire self-improvement journey. And from there, that's when I started researching and looking into what habits would give me the best results for what I'm looking for. And of course, if you go too deep into it, you get into a rabbit hole. There's too many habits out there. But then you get to a point where you refine it down to there are these essential practices, these essential habits that will absolutely skyrocket you to success. And by finding those, I was able to set myself up onto the self-improvement journey. So that's why I say Atomic Habits is so good, because the framework of Atomic Habits, of developing habits and breaking old habits, is an essential foundational piece to self-improvement. And it's also just a really good book. If you're somebody who doesn't have a very high level of reading skill, it's a good book for you to read because it is very easy to read. Same with the next one. The next one is a very easy read. So if you have a lower reading level, then you can start with these books, but not obviously not too low. These are a little bit more complicated than like a first grade reading level. But if you have a lower reading level or you just have a harder time reading, these first two are good books for you to start with. So the second book I have here is The Power of Now, and I don't know who you are, but I know damn well I've heard this book suggested way too many times. So I'm going to say to you, don't completely disregard it yet. The reason I say The Power of Now and the reason I think The Power of Now is so essential is because one of my biggest blockages with reading came because I was thinking over the words. I was thinking over what I was reading and therefore getting lost in the thought about the reading about the book instead of reading the book, right? So one thing that The Power of Now taught me, and there's a lot more as far as The Power of Now goes, but because this video is about reading, I'm going to focus on the reading benefit. What The Power of Now taught me was to be fully present and fully just placing my awareness onto the book and reading the book and taking in that information and letting my brain do what it does in the background, but my attention stays fixated on just reading the book and being present in the moment. With that, I doubled my reading time, or halved my reading time, I guess you could say. I halved my reading time, and I also doubled my comprehension, right? So I got way more comprehension because my awareness was actually present in what I was reading, and I halved my reading time because I was able to read much faster because I wasn't going constantly back and forth from reading the book to thinking about what I was reading to reading the book. I was just reading the book through and through. So that is a skill I learned from The Power of Now as far as reading goes. But the main reason I suggest The Power of Now is because it's a really, really easy book to read. It's really insightful. It's really beneficial for anybody on a spiritual path. If you're into meditation, if you're into presence, if you're into awareness, consciousness, any form of spiritual path, right? This book is really, really beneficial. It's probably the best explanation I've ever had for how to achieve presence. And it's the only one that kind of helped me to tangibly feel what that's like. So it's another really good book for beginners or pretty much anybody on self-improvement. But another reason, it's a really easy read, a little bit easier than Atomic Habits. So because it's a little bit easier than Atomic Habits, it's a really easy book for anybody to get into if you're just starting off reading. And the last book that I have is The Way of the Superior Man. And again, it's a very simple, easy read. For those who don't have a lot of time to read, they're nice short chapters, and each chapter is basically its own point. So you can read it, one chapter at a time. You can read one chapter in the front, one chapter in the back, and it won't matter. So for those of you who aren't able to really sit down and read a full book, this is a great book because it breaks it up into small sections. And so you can just read one small section at a time. However, the actual book is about masculinity and the power of masculinity, so the suggestions obviously for men. However, there is an alternative. I believe it's called Dear Lover is the alternative book, but it's literally the exact same book but the feminine version. So it's the feminine way of the superior man, right? So they're the same book, but one's for men, one's for women. Same author, same everything. So if you're a woman, Dear Lover is the alternative to this. But The Way of the Superior Man basically talks about basic masculinity concepts and how to navigate work, relationships, women, desire, and sexuality within a spiritual perspective. So I do really like that book. I really enjoyed that book, and it's a really good one to start off because one of my main blockers was that these big books would intimidate me. I can't read the whole book, and it would take a long time, and so it would really intimidate me. One way to start to break through that is to take a book that you could read section by section. So that's why I like the Way of the Superior Man, because The Way of the Superior Man, each chapter is its own point, as I said before. So you can just read one chapter at a time. They're nice short chapters, nice and concise, but it's a lot of information, it's a lot of insight, and it's tangible stuff that you can actually work with as well. So those are my 3 book suggestions. If you need any more book suggestions, or if you didn't like any of those and you want to start reading today, you can comment down below. I'll reply to your comment, help you guys pick out some good books for you. But that is all I have for this video, so I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like, and if you want to see more content like this, subscribe to the channel. Before I go, if you guys learned anything valuable, please just leave that in the comments below. I love to see what you guys are learning. I love to see what points you guys are actually receiving from these videos. So that's all I have for this video, and I'm out of here. Peace.